Lion faces forest fire to save child. The ending is surprising. The bushfire started the way they always did in the Australian summer. A lightning strike in tinder-dry eucalyptus forest, a spark catching on bark stripped from overheated trees, and suddenly the world was burning. By the time the alarm went up at the Mornington Wildlife Sanctuary in Victoria's high country, flames were already racing through 50 hectares of bushland, driven by scorching northerly winds that turned everything in their path to ash. Sarah Chen was in the veterinary clinic when the evacuation order came through. As head vet at the sanctuary, she'd been through bushfire drills dozens of times, but this was different. The fire was moving faster than predicted, jumping containment lines, heading straight for the big cat enclosures on the eastern boundary. "We need to move the lions now. Get the transport cages ready." Her team scrambled into action. The sanctuary housed 6 lions, all rescues from circuses and private collections that had been shut down. They'd been here for years, as close to wild as captive lions could be, living in a massive enclosure that mimicked their natural habitat as much as possible. But there was one lion who concerned Sarah more than the others. Aslan, a 12-year-old male who'd come to them 8 years ago from a bankrupt circus. He'd been abused, starved, beaten into submission. It had taken years of patient work to help him recover physically, but emotionally he remained withdrawn, distrustful of humans, except for Sarah. She was the only person he'd allow near him, the only one who could touch him without triggering panic. The smoke was already thick in the air when Sarah reached the lion enclosure. Her team was working to herd the other lions into transport cages, but Aslan stood at the far end of the habitat, watching the approaching fire with an intensity that made Sarah's stomach clench. "Aslan, come on, mate. We need to move." The lion didn't respond. Sarah knew that look. He was stressed, reverting to the defensive behaviors he'd shown when he first arrived. Approaching him now could be dangerous, but they were running out of time. The fire was less than a kilometer away, the heat already palpable, ash falling like grey snow. Sarah was about to enter the enclosure when her mobile rang. Her ex-husband, Michael. "Sarah, please tell me you've got Emma." Sarah's blood turned to ice. Emma, their 7-year-old daughter. She was supposed to be at her father's place in town, 40 kilometers away, safe from the fires. "What do you mean? Do I have Emma? She's with you." But she got upset when I told her about the sanctuary being evacuated. She was crying about the lions, about Aslan. I turned my back for 2 minutes and she was gone. "Sarah, I've searched everywhere. She's not at the house. The police are looking, but..." Sarah didn't hear the rest. Her daughter was missing during a bushfire. And if Emma was thinking about Aslan, if she'd somehow gotten it into her head to come here, how long ago? 90 minutes, maybe 2 hours. I didn't want to panic you. Thought she'd turn up, but Sarah ended the call and started running. The sanctuary was massive, over 200 hectares of bushland and enclosures. If Emma had come here, had somehow made it through the perimeter fence, she could be anywhere. And with the fire approaching, she radioed the emergency coordinator. "We have a child missing on the property. 7-year-old girl. Brown hair, probably wearing blue. Emma Chen. She's my daughter." The response was immediate. All available staff began searching, but they were desperately short-handed with the evacuation in progress. The fire wasn't waiting for anyone. Sarah's mind raced. If Emma had come here for Aslan, where would she go? The child had been fascinated by the lion since she was tiny, would spend hours at the observation platform watching him. Sarah had told her stories about Aslan's rescue, about how brave he was, how special. Emma had declared him her favorite animal in the whole world, the observation platform. It was on the eastern edge of Aslan's enclosure, closest to the approaching fire, but it was where Emma always went. Sarah sprinted through the smoke, her eyes stinging, lungs burning. She could hear the fire now, a roaring, crackling sound like some massive beast consuming everything in its path. The heat was intense. The sky turned an apocalyptic orange. When she reached the observation platform, her worst fears were confirmed. The gate was open. Emma had somehow managed to climb the fence and get inside Aslan's enclosure. And there, huddled against the base of the platform, was her daughter, coughing in the smoke, tears streaming down her face. Emma. Sarah vaulted the fence without thinking, every maternal instinct overriding her training, her common sense, everything. She had to get to her daughter. But as she landed inside the enclosure, she realized her mistake. Aslan was there, standing between Sarah and Emma, his massive body tense, ears back. The fire was less than 200 meters away now, and the lion was terrified, unpredictable. Sarah froze. Emma, baby, don't move. Stay very still. But Emma wasn't looking at her mother. She was looking at Aslan, her small face filled with fear, not of the lion, but of the approaching inferno. Mummy, the fire's going to hurt Aslan. We have to save him. Emma, listen to me. Very slowly, walk toward me. Don't run, just walk. Emma started to move, but at that moment, a massive eucalyptus tree at the edge of the enclosure exploded in flame with a sound like a gunshot. Both Emma and Aslan bolted, Emma toward the far corner of the enclosure, away from both Sarah and the exit, and Aslan. Aslan ran toward Emma. Sarah screamed, running after them, but the lion was faster. He reached Emma in seconds, and Sarah watched in horror as the massive predator opened his jaws. This was it. Her daughter was going to die, torn apart by a traumatized lion, while fire consumed everything around them. But Aslan didn't attack. Instead, he grabbed Emma by the back of her shirt, the way a mother lion carries a cub, and turned toward the far end of the enclosure, away from the exit, away from safety, towards the fire. No! Aslan, no! Sarah chased after them, but the smoke was too thick now, her eyes streaming, her lungs refusing to work properly. She lost sight of them in the grey-brown haze, lost sight of her daughter being carried by a terrified lion into a bushfire. Sarah stumbled through the smoke, screaming Emma's name until her throat was raw. The heat was unbearable now, the fire so close she could feel it singeing the hair on her arms. She had to get out, had to get help. But the thought of leaving Emma out here, in the jaws of a panicked lion, in the path of a bushfire. A hand grabbed her arm, one of the sanctuary rangers, face covered with a wet cloth. "Dr. Chen, we have to evacuate now. The fire's jumped the containment line. My daughter, she's in here with Aslan. We'll come back with firefighters, with tranquilizer guns. But if we don't leave now, we'll die too." Sarah let herself be dragged toward the exit, every step feeling like betrayal. As they cleared the fence, she looked back one last time. Through a gap in the smoke, she saw something that made no sense. Aslan was still carrying Emma, but he wasn't running wild. He was moving with purpose, heading toward the creek that ran through the eastern boundary of his enclosure, the one place the fire might not reach immediately, where the vegetation was greener, damper. He's taking her to the creek. Oh my God, he's trying to save her. The ranger looked where Sarah was pointing, his expression shifting from skepticism to amazement. Lions don't do that. They don't save people. This one does. This one knows her. Sarah's mind flashed back through 8 years of visits with Emma. How her daughter would sit at the observation platform for hours, talking to Aslan through the fence. How the lion would always come to that spot when Emma was there, lying down where she could see him, sometimes making soft rumbling sounds. Sarah had thought it was just tolerance, the lion accepting the presence of a non-threatening human. But what if it was more than that? What if, in his own way, Aslan had bonded with Emma the way he'd bonded with Sarah? "I need to get to the creek. There's a fire access road that runs near it. Dr. Chen, that road's in the path of the fire. Then we'd better bloody move." Sarah commandeered a fire truck that was evacuating equipment, convincing the crew that there was a child in the creek zone. They drove as close as they dared, the heat so intense the truck's paint was blistering. Sarah jumped out before they'd fully stopped, pulling on a firefighter's helmet and coat someone thrust at her. The creek was 50 meters away through burning scrub. Sarah ran, the heat so extreme she thought her lungs would burst. She could hear the fire behind her, could feel it reaching for her like a living thing. Then she was at the creek, plunging into water that should have been cool, but was merely less hot than the air around it. The smoke cleared slightly here, and Sarah saw them. Aslan was standing in the middle of the creek, water up to his belly. Emma was no longer in his mouth, but pressed against his side, the lion's massive body between her and the approaching flames. The child's face was buried in his mane, her small arms wrapped around his neck. The lion saw Sarah and made a sound, not a roar, not a growl, but something closer to the rumbling call Sarah had heard him make only with her: recognition, relief. Emma, Emma, baby. Emma's head lifted. Her face was black with soot, her eyes red from smoke, but she was alive, she was alive. Mummy, Aslan saved me. He brought me to the water. Sarah waded through the creek, and Aslan didn't move, didn't show any aggression. He simply stood there, protecting the child against his side, until Sarah reached them. Only then did he step back, allowing Sarah to gather Emma into her arms. The child was coughing, clearly had inhaled smoke, but she was conscious and talking. Sarah held her so tight Emma squeaked in protest. "We need to move. The fire's going to jump the creek." Sarah looked at Aslan. The lion was standing in the water, watching her with those amber eyes that had seen so much cruelty, so much pain. He'd faced fire, the thing that terrified every wild animal on instinct, to save a child, not his own species, not his pride, but a small human girl who'd shown him kindness. "Come on, mate. We're all getting out of here." Sarah started leading Emma back toward the fire truck, but Aslan didn't follow. He stood in the creek, water swirling around his legs, watching them go. "Mummy, we can't leave him. Emma, he won't come with us. He's too scared of the fire, too scared of people. We have to—" But Emma pulled free of Sarah's grip and turned back to Aslan. She walked right up to the massive lion, this child who should have been torn apart, should have been prey, and reached out to touch his face. "Please, Aslan, please, come with us. I don't want you to die." The lion lowered his head, pressing his scarred muzzle into Emma's small hand. Then he took a step forward, then another. He was following them. Sarah couldn't believe what she was seeing. Aslan, who trusted no one, who'd spent 8 years keeping humans at arm's length, was walking out of the creek after a 7-year-old girl, was choosing humans over the relative safety of the water. They made it to the fire truck in a strange procession, Sarah leading, Emma in the middle, and a fully grown male lion following behind like an overgrown dog. The firefighters' faces when they saw Aslan were priceless, shock and fear warring with professional duty. "Is that a bloody lion?" "Yes, and he's coming with us." "Open the back of the truck." "Ma'am, we can't transport a lion in a fire truck." "You can and you will. That lion just saved my daughter's life." The urgency in Sarah's voice, combined with the approaching wall of flame, convinced them. They opened the back compartment usually used for equipment. Sarah climbed in first, then Emma, then incredibly Aslan jumped up after them. The truck took off, racing down the fire access road with flames on either side. Sarah held Emma close, checking her breathing, her pulse, looking for burns. The child was remarkably unharmed, just smoke inhalation and shock. Aslan lay in the corner of the compartment, his sides heaving, his eyes closed. Sarah could see burns on his paws, on his nose, places where he'd been close enough to the fire to be injured. He'd gotten hurt protecting Emma. When they finally reached safety, the sanctuary's main compound, which had been spared by a wind change, paramedics rushed to take Emma. She clung to Sarah, crying now that the danger had passed. "I'm sorry, Mummy. I'm sorry. I just wanted to make sure Aslan was okay. I heard Daddy say the lions might die in the fire and I couldn't let that happen." "Shh, baby, it's okay, you're okay." But Emma wasn't looking at Sarah. She was looking past her, at Aslan, who'd climbed down from the fire truck and was standing there watching them, this wild creature who'd done something completely against his nature. The paramedics wanted to take Emma to hospital immediately, but the child refused to leave until she knew Aslan would be okay. Sarah found herself in the surreal position of treating a lion's burns, while her daughter sat nearby, wrapped in a foil blanket, refusing to get in the ambulance. "He saved me, Mummy. He carried me in his mouth and didn't hurt me at all. He stood in the fire to keep me safe." Sarah cleaned Aslan's burned paws with antiseptic, the lion lying still and letting her work despite what must have been considerable pain. His trust in her had extended to this moment of vulnerability, when every instinct should have told him to flee or fight. The other sanctuary staff watched from a safe distance, amazed. Lions didn't behave like this. Traumatized rescue lions especially didn't behave like this. Yet here was Aslan, allowing treatment, staying close to the child he'd saved. Doc Henderson, the sanctuary's senior vet who'd been off-site during the fire, arrived an hour later. He examined Aslan thoroughly, his weathered face creased with concern. Second-degree burns on all four paws, burns on his face and muzzle. He's inhaled a fair bit of smoke. He needs IV fluids, antibiotics, pain management. Sarah, he should be sedated for transport to the veterinary center. Will he be all right? Physically, yes. But Sarah, what he did. I've been working with big cats for 30 years, and I've never seen anything like it. Lions don't save human children. They see them as prey, or at best as threats to be avoided. Sarah looked at Aslan, this magnificent, damaged creature who defied every expectation. Maybe he's not like other lions. Maybe what he went through in that circus, the abuse, the isolation, maybe it changed him, made him understand suffering in a way most animals don't. Or maybe, Doc Henderson said quietly, he understood love. The words hung in the air. Emma had fallen asleep, exhausted, curled up on a bench with a sanctuary blanket. Sarah finally agreed to let the paramedics take her to hospital for proper evaluation, promising Emma she'd check on Aslan every hour. At the hospital, doctors confirmed Emma had moderate smoke inhalation, but would make a full recovery. Michael arrived, white-faced, with guilt and relief. He held their daughter and cried, apologizing over and over for taking his eyes off her. "I thought I'd lost her. When they told me about the fire, about her being in the lion enclosure, I thought, she's okay. We're all okay because of Aslan." Michael looked at Sarah with an expression she couldn't quite read. "The media's already got the story. Someone filmed the fire truck arriving with a lion in it. It's going viral. They're calling him the hero lion, saying he defied nature to save a child." Sarah felt her stomach drop. Media attention was the last thing they needed. The sanctuary relied on donations and public goodwill, but intense scrutiny could be dangerous. People might question whether it was safe to keep lions if a child could get into the enclosure. They might demand Aslan be put down, despite what he'd done. We need to control the narrative, make sure people understand what really happened. Over the next few days, Sarah found herself thrust into the spotlight. News crews camped outside the sanctuary. The footage of Aslan following Emma to the fire truck had been viewed millions of times. International media picked up the story. Everyone wanted to know about the lion who'd saved a child. Sarah gave interviews, carefully explaining Aslan's history, how he'd been rescued from abuse, how Emma had visited him for years, building a bond neither Sarah nor anyone else had fully understood. She emphasized the exceptional nature of the situation, that this wasn't typical lion behavior and people shouldn't approach wild animals thinking they'd be safe. But what she didn't talk about, what she kept private, was what she discovered 3 days after the fire. She was checking on Aslan in his temporary recovery enclosure. The main habitat had been damaged by fire and needed repairs. The lion was healing well, the burns on his paws responding to treatment. Emma visited every day after school, sitting outside the enclosure talking to him, and Aslan would always come to the fence, pressing his scarred face close to hers. Sarah was reviewing Aslan's medical file, something she'd done hundreds of times before when she noticed something she'd somehow missed. A notation from when he'd first arrived at the sanctuary 8 years ago. The circus he'd come from had kept detailed records. They'd needed to prove ownership, lineage, vaccination history. Aslan had been born in captivity. His mother had been a circus lion too, named Sheba. And there, in the notes about Sheba, was a detail that made Sarah's breath catch in her throat. Sheba had died giving birth to a cub 3 months before the circus was shut down. The cub had been premature, weak, not expected to survive. The circus owner had kept it anyway, trying to hand-rear it, but the cub had died after 2 weeks. Except the cub hadn't died. Sarah's hands shook as she pulled up another file, the records from the children's hospital where Emma had been born 7 years ago, premature by 6 weeks. Touch and go for the first 2 weeks of her life. Sarah remembered that time like it was yesterday. She'd been working at the sanctuary then, but on reduced hours because of her difficult pregnancy. She'd been at the sanctuary the day the police raid on the circus happened. Had been there when they'd brought in 6 traumatized lions, including Aslan. She'd been 8 months pregnant. Had gone into early labor that very night from the stress of the day. Had given birth to Emma 6 weeks ahead of schedule. Sarah had spent 2 weeks barely leaving the hospital, terrified she'd lose her daughter. During that time, her colleague had been managing Aslan's intake. By the time Sarah returned to work, the files were already mixed up, some records lost in the chaos of the sanctuary, taking in multiple animals at once. The dates matched. The timeline matched. Sheba had given birth to a premature cub at the circus. Emma had been born premature at the hospital, both around the same time, both struggling to survive. Sarah's mind raced back to Emma's first visit to the sanctuary when she was 2 years old, how Aslan had immediately come to the fence, how he'd watched Emma with an intensity that had seemed odd even then, how, over the years, he'd allowed only Sarah and Emma close to him. It was impossible, completely impossible, yet Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that somehow on some level she couldn't explain. Aslan had recognized something in Emma, had recognized the timing, the vulnerability, something. Or maybe Sarah was seeing patterns that weren't there, trying to make sense of something that defied explanation. Lions didn't have that kind of awareness. Couldn't make those connections. But lions also didn't face fire to save human children. Sarah kept her discovery to herself for 2 weeks, wrestling with what it might mean. Finally, she contacted the former circus owner, now serving time for animal cruelty charges. The conversation was brief and disturbing. The lion cub. Yeah, I remember. Little female, barely alive. I tried to save her, but she was too weak. Died after about 10 days. Are you certain she died? Did you see the body? A long pause. My assistant handled the disposal. Said he'd buried her out back. Why are you asking about this now? Just updating records. Thank you. Sarah hung up and sat in her office, staring at the wall. An assistant who handled the disposal, a premature cub who might not have actually died. It was a stretch, a massive leap of logic that required believing in coincidences that bordered on impossible. But that evening, when Emma came for her daily visit to Aslan, Sarah watched the way the lion looked at her daughter, not the way an animal looks at a human, not even the way a tamed lion looks at a familiar keeper. There was something else there. Something in those amber eyes that Sarah had seen before but never understood. Recognition. Not of Emma specifically, but of something Emma represented: vulnerability, innocence, the need for protection. Or maybe, and Sarah barely allowed herself to think this, the memory of a cub, his sister. "Mummy, why are you crying?" Sarah wiped her eyes quickly, pulling Emma close. "Just thinking about how lucky we are, how lucky I am to have you, because Aslan saved me, because you're here, because you're you." Emma wriggled free and pressed her face against the enclosure fence. Aslan came immediately, making that rumbling sound he only made for Sarah and Emma. The child laughed. "He's purring. Mummy, listen, he's purring. Lions didn't purr, not the way small cats did, but they made sounds of contentment, of bonding." Sarah had heard Aslan make that sound with her when she was treating him, when she'd spent hours earning his trust. Now he made it for Emma, too. "Emma, I need to tell you something about the day you were born." Sarah explained in simple terms that Emma could understand, about being premature, about being very sick, about how scared Sarah had been. She didn't mention the circus cub, didn't want to confuse her daughter with theories she couldn't prove. "So I was sick like Aslan was sick when he came here." "Sort of. You were both vulnerable. Both needed extra care to survive. Maybe that's why he saved me. Because he knows what it's like to need saving, out of the mouths of children." Sarah hugged Emma tight, marveling at her daughter's wisdom. The sanctuary's main enclosures were repaired 3 weeks after the fire. The other lions were returned to their habitats, settling back in with minimal fuss. But when it came time to move Aslan back, Sarah hesitated. The fire had destroyed the eastern boundary of his enclosure, the section closest to where the observation platform had been. In rebuilding, the sanctuary board had to make a decision about the platform, repair it, or remove it for safety reasons, given what had happened with Emma. Sarah argued for keeping it, argued that what happened wasn't a failure of safety, but an extraordinary circumstance that would never happen again. She won, but with conditions: better fencing, better locks, warning signs. On the day Aslan was moved back to his habitat, Emma was at school. Sarah supervised the transfer, watching as the lion explored his repaired territory, sniffing every corner, marking boundaries. He stopped at the rebuilt observation platform, looking up at it for a long moment. That afternoon, Emma came for her visit. She climbed up to the platform, with supervision now, the new rules, and Aslan immediately came to lie down in his usual spot, the spot where he could see her clearly. The spot where he'd been lying 8 years ago when a pregnant Sarah had walked by. The spot where he'd been lying 7 years ago when Sarah had first brought baby Emma to see the sanctuary. Had he known then? Had some instinct told him this small human was connected to him in ways neither of them could understand? Sarah would never know, could never prove her theory about the circus cub who might not have died, might have been taken by a well-meaning assistant who couldn't bear to kill a premature lion cub, might have been abandoned in the bush, where she died anyway. Her brief life overlapping with Emma's by pure cosmic coincidence, or maybe it was simpler than that. Maybe Aslan had simply learned, through years of abuse and isolation, to recognize suffering in others, had learned that vulnerable things deserve protection, not predation, had learned what it meant to save rather than savage. 6 months after the fire, the sanctuary held a fundraising gala. The story of Aslan and Emma had brought in donations from around the world, enough to rebuild the damaged habitats, upgrade safety systems, and expand their rescue operations. Emma, dressed in her best clothes, gave a speech that Sarah had helped her write, but that was entirely in her own words. Everyone calls Aslan a hero. They say he did something lions aren't supposed to do, but I don't think he's different from other lions. I think he's what lions are supposed to be: strong and brave and protective. The circus hurt him and made him scared, but he didn't stay scared forever. He got better, just like I got better when I was a baby. And when I needed him, he remembered what it's like to need help, so he helped me. The crowd applauded, many wiping tears. Sarah stood at the back, watching her daughter, and felt a hand on her shoulder. Doc Henderson. That's quite a kid you've got there. She's extraordinary. Like the lion. Doc looked at Sarah with knowing eyes. I read the files, the old circus records. I know what you found. Sarah's heart skipped. It's probably just coincidence. The dates, the circumstances. Probably. Doc agreed. But I've been doing this work long enough to know that sometimes there are connections we can't explain. Bonds that transcend logic. Whether that cub survived or not, whether there's any actual genetic connection or just a strange parallel, it doesn't really matter, does it? What do you mean? Aslan saved Emma because of who he is, because of what he learned about protecting the vulnerable. Whether he recognized something in her or just chose to act against his fear, that's the real miracle. Not that they might be connected by birth, but that they're connected by something deeper. Compassion, courage, love. Sarah nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. After the gala, Sarah and Emma visited Aslan one last time before heading home. The lion was lying in his usual spot, regal and peaceful. Emma pressed her hand against the fence. Thank you, Aslan, for saving me, for being brave, for being you. The lion rumbled, pressed his scarred face close to the fence. Sarah took a photo. Emma's small hand against the wire, Aslan's massive head inches away. 2 survivors, 2 fighters. Family in the ways that mattered most. That night, tucking Emma into bed, Sarah asked the question she'd been holding on to. Do you think Aslan really knew you? Before the fire? That maybe he was meant to save you? Emma thought about this seriously, her 7-year-old face solemn. I think he knew me because I visited him, because I talked to him, because I wasn't scared. And when I needed him, he knew what to do, same way you always know what to do when I need you. That's what family does. Sarah kissed her daughter's forehead, marveling at how someone so young could be so wise. You're right, that's exactly what family does. Later, sitting on her porch with a cup of tea, Sarah thought about the mystery she'd never solve. Had that circus cub survived? Had someone tried to save her, only for her to die in the bush? Or had Sarah created an elaborate fiction to explain something that needed no explanation? In the end, it didn't matter. What mattered was that Aslan had faced fire for Emma, had carried her gently in jaws that could crush bone, had protected her with his own body, had chosen courage over fear, compassion over instinct. Whether they shared blood or simply shared survival, whether cosmic coincidence or careful calculation, they were connected, lion and child, survivor and survivor, family forged not in biology, but in the fires of chance and choice. And really, Sarah thought, taking a sip of tea and looking up at the stars, wasn't that the best kind of family? The kind you chose, the kind that chose you back, the kind that would face any fire to keep you safe. In his enclosure, Aslan slept peacefully, his burns healed, his paws no longer paining him. He dreamed whatever lions dream, of running free, perhaps, or of a small human child with trusting eyes who'd shown him that even after everything he'd endured, he was still capable of something greater than survival. He was capable of love, and that, in the end, was the real surprise. Not that a lion saved a child, but that a broken heart could heal enough to care again. That was the ending no one saw coming. The healing, the hope, the extraordinary, ordinary miracle of choosing compassion when the world had taught you cruelty. That was Aslan's real gift to Emma. Not just saving her life, but showing everyone, that no matter what you've been through, you can still choose to be a hero.